Have you ever found yourself wanting to say no, but feeling like you had to say yes instead? Or feeling like you're overly thinking about your partner's needs or their schedule, and you're basing all of the choices around your own life based on that? I want to talk today about what it means to be overly accommodating in relationships and where that actually comes from. Because a lot of the times we think we're being supportive, we're being a good partner, we're doing what love is. But really, there is a part of us that feels like we need to do these things to maintain the connection, to receive love. And over time, that leads to resentment and frustration. My name is Crystal Hoban, and I am a love and relationship coach. And I help people find partners and relationships that actually choose them because they've learned to choose themselves first. Let's get into it. Today, I want to talk about how being over accommodating in relationships is not just something that happens in romantic relationships, but it's something that if you were primed, if you were taught that you are someone who is meant to fill other people's needs, someone who is meant to meet other people's needs, to be able to receive connection, to be able to receive love, that this is something that plays out not just in romantic relationships, but also in all relationships. And it's often something that goes, I think, unaware, like it's out of our awareness. We're not aware that we're doing this. And this is something that I personally have noticed that I consistently fall into this pattern sometimes, and I have to take a step back and recognize it when I'm doing it. And it's something that has been a thing since my childhood, right? So, it's a way that you've been forever. So, how do you change that, right? What does that look like? How do you even recognize that you're doing that? And this has been a really big growing space for me, and a space where I've really had to pay more attention and acknowledge the ways that I do this. So, one of the ways that this can happen is that maybe you're that friend who always goes out of your way to create the connection, right? Or maintain the connection. So that could look like you're always the one traveling to see that friend. You're always the one putting your plans on the back burner to go see other people, right? Or to make plans or whatever that may be. But when it comes time for you to have things that you want to celebrate for yourself, or you're inviting others, they don't show up. And I think this is one of the biggest ones that, like, the biggest ways that this shows up, that was the first time that I really started to recognize that I was over giving or over accommodating in relationships. And it kind of creates this dynamic where if you're not putting yourself out there or consistently putting your stuff to the side for other people, then that relationship actually is not going to continue. And I think that's a very painful realization, right? Like, some people are going to meet you halfway and some people aren't. But if you create a relationship dynamic where you're constantly the one putting your feelings aside, putting your plans aside, putting your time aside, right? And that's not happening equally the other way, then you're creating this overly accommodating kind of dynamic. And over time, this becomes exhausting. It feels resentful. It also feels like you're putting so much work and effort in, and someone else isn't like meeting you halfway, right? And I think that there are people who are willing to meet you halfway, and there's people that aren't. And when you start to shift or transition or recognize that you're doing this, it often leads to some relationships just not being able to survive the expectation of being equal. And when you're overly accommodating, I just want to talk about how this really comes from feeling like as a kid, you had to be perfect to receive love. You had to receive really good grades to receive attention, right? There's so many different ways that this actually happens, and starts to create this way of behaving and moving and being in relationships. But normally it starts from a very young age, where it felt like you had to do so much to receive love. And this plays out, like I said, in relationships that are just friendships and things like that, but this also plays out in romantic relationships. And I think that from my own experience, it plays out a lot more in romantic relationships where you might start scheduling your life around that relationship in a lot of ways. And over time, as you continue to do that, you start to feel like you're on their terms, you're on their time. And I would say that that is a signal or a sign that you may be overly giving or overly accommodating to them and not giving the space for them to meet you halfway. And that can often lead to resentment. And when you then ask for something, right, and you're not met, it can lead to like this frustration, this anger, this like, what the frick do you mean you're not going to meet my needs? I've been meeting your needs silently, right? Without them asking, just overly accommodating. And it leads to like this frustration within the relationship of like, you don't care about me, you don't show up for me, right? And I think one of the harder things that personally in my own healing journey that I've had to realize is that I was participating in that creation of that dynamic. And it was so automatic and so like under the surface because I had just done this in every relationship since I was a kid that I didn't even realize I was doing it until I took a step back and was like, why am I so upset about this person not meeting my need when I asked for it? And when I sat with myself, it made me realize that I'm doing all of these things without them asking me to do it because I think that's what a relationship is. I think that's what love is. And I think a lot of the times that's how we kind of like make sense of it or make meaning of it for ourselves is like we tell ourselves that that's what you do when you love someone, you sacrifice, right? And there's definitely a fine line between sacrificing and compromising and overly sacrificing, right? Those are all different things. And when we're somebody who overly sacrifices in relationships because we think that's what love is or what it needs to maintain a connection, to receive love, to keep the relationship going, we're often the ones who feel like we're doing so much and we're not getting the same back, right? And then when we communicate that to our partner, it causes frustration, or we communicate that to our friends, it causes frustration, right? And on the spiritual journey that I've been on, and the self-development journey, it's just been a lot about me kind of looking towards myself. And so if you're ever feeling resentment or feeling like you're giving so much or you're on their time, right? That's a second to take a step back and ask yourself, okay, this is how I'm feeling about the dynamic and system, right? How am I participating in that, right? How am I creating that in some ways? And I don't think it's the easiest thing to look at ourselves, but if we actually want to change that or we want to shift the way that that's happening, we don't want to feel that way anymore. That's actually what needs to happen. We need to be able to look at ourselves and say, okay, I am putting my life on hold in certain ways. I am working around their schedule. I am the one who always goes and meets them. And that's not happening the other way, right? And I'm not really giving space to be met. I'm not really giving space for them to accommodate for me. And when you're an over accommodator, it's so natural and it feels like a personality thing. It feels like you're doing the right thing, you're doing the kind thing, you're showing love, right? And I just want to acknowledge that it's a little bit of a skewed way of thinking about how love needs to be received in relationships, what how connection actually happens in relationships, right? Healthy relationships are in the middle. And if you're constantly feeling like I'm doing this to show love, I'm doing this because I'm kind, I'm doing this because I'm a good friend, I'm doing this because I'm a good partner, right? And you're telling yourself that over and over again, this is kind of how the ego gets in the way. And it's saying, this is how you're making sense of it. And you're saying that it's okay that you're doing these things, even though deep down you're building resentment, you're building frustration. It doesn't actually feel good. But I just have to say that the breaking of this is so difficult. And especially when this is how you have been primed to be in relationships, and this is how you understand love to be in relationships, this is a lot of the reason why we feel taken advantage of. We feel like we're putting more in than someone else. And it really comes down to, are you focused on yourself? Are you able to take care of your own needs first and meet somebody after that? And I think that's where the shift can start to happen, right? Are you actually taking care of what you need, or are you sacrificing your needs for someone else? And this is something I see a lot, and I've seen a lot as a marriage and family therapist. And it's something I've also noticed a lot with like trauma survivors as well, and in my own journey too. And it's so under the surface, we don't even realize that we're doing it. And I think that's like the hardest part. But if you're having that internal dialogue, right, of I'm being a good partner, I'm being a kind partner, I'm being the good person, right? And that's what you're telling yourself rather than asking yourself, does this actually serve me? And is this actually what I want and what I need? Or am I sacrificing my own needs and what I want to meet this person so that I can maintain this connection, right? I talk a lot about self abandonment. And this is one of the ways that I think we do this without realizing we're doing this because we have been so programmed to do this from such a young age, usually. And breaking this way of functioning and being is really difficult. It takes a lot of self awareness to stop and ask yourself, to stop and sit with yourself, to stop and ask, why am I actually doing this? And what is this really about? Right? Is this really something that I want to do, or is this something that I feel like I'm supposed to do or have to do? Because a lot of these ways of functioning come from feeling like loyalty, and that's how we're defining it, or feeling like we're obliged to do it, we're obligated to do it, right? And eventually that leads to resentment, that leads to frustration, that leads to feeling like the relationship isn't equal, feeling like you've lost yourself in the relationship. And this happens in so many small ways over time that are usually out of our awareness until we're ready to freaking blow. We're ready to explode. We're so angry, right? When we finally ask for that need or that want or for them to show up for us and they don't, and we get really angry, that's a sign. It's probably one of the biggest signs that you've been doing this in smaller ways. And so this takes you being able to kind of like ask yourself those questions and sit with yourself around that. And it's not an easy cycle to break, like I said, if you've been doing it forever. But being aware of it is the first step to being able to change it. Recognizing it is the first step in being able to do something different. And understanding what it is that's keeping us in the cycle of doing, right? Is it that we feel like we need to do this to maintain connection, that this is what love is supposed to be? Is this what a good partner looks like, right? All of these beliefs that we tell ourselves is what informs that. And so, how do you recognize what's underneath that and what's informing that and start to see those in a different way? So, this is exactly what I do as a coach. And this is exactly what I help people do. And I just want to acknowledge that it's not an easy thing, it's not a one and done kind of thing. You can be so aware of this pattern and this way of being that you do this, right? And yet it can still creep up in certain ways. It's something that kind of takes this active place that you have to continuously be questioning, sitting and acknowledging anytime you're feeling that way. Instead of blaming your partner, instead of blaming the friends, instead of saying nobody shows up for me, right? How am I keeping that going? That's the bigger question. How am I, in the way that I'm behaving, the way that I'm thinking, maintaining this in so many different spaces? And only when you can start to acknowledge those things and sit with those things can you really understand how to start to do that differently. So, if you need help with this, I am a love and relationship coach, and I help people to not lose themselves in relationships so that they can find a partner that chooses them and relationships that choose them because they learned how to choose themselves first. You can find out more information at crystalclearmystic.com. But just know this is a difficult thing to move through. It's not the easiest, and it's often so invisible to us until we see it. Remember, the healthiest relationships are not built by becoming easier to love. They're built by you becoming more fully yourself. See you in the next episode.